Good morning. I'm delighted to start International Women's Day with this special event focused on investing in Central America's Northern Triangle and women's economic empowerment. I'm Jason Marzek, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsht Latin America Center, and I want to welcome our small in-person studio audience, as well as all those joining virtually today, especially Dr. Rebecca Lissner, who we'll hear from in a moment from the Office of the Vice President. On this day, but frankly every day, it's important to look at the critical role that women play in driving economic growth and development in the region. This central focus on women's role in these economies is part of our Mujeres at the Table campaign, where each March we dedicate programming and publications to the key role of women across Latin America and the Caribbean. Central America's northern countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and a welcome to the Guatemalan ambassador who's joining us today, Ambassador Quinones. Those three countries are home to over 32 million people with a combined GDP of approximately $100 billion. However, despite its potential, the region faces significant economic challenges, including poverty, limited economic opportunities, uncertainty of the rule of law, violence, and as described in the administration's root causes strategy, gender-based violence specifically. Investing in these countries is essential to address the root causes of migration from the region, a key area of our center's own programming. Currently, and through the generous support of our donors, our Central America Task Force is focused on co-creating roadmaps for the acceleration of business confidence in the northern countries of Central America. For women's economic empowerment, significant barriers exist. Women in Central America face limited access to capital, formal employment, and financial services, all resulting in lower levels of productivity and economic growth. According to the International Financial Corporation, just under half of women in the region have an account at a formal financial institution, just under half, and that's compared to over 6 in 10 men. Additionally, women are more likely to have limited access to credit, which limits their ability to start and grow businesses. And now I'm an optimist, and there are signs of progress. I see a growing recognition of the importance of women's economic empowerment in the region, and this must be continued and strengthened. Here, the United States has been a key partner. Through the In Her Hands initiative, VP Harris announced new commitments to support women's economic empowerment. And again, I'm delighted that Dr. Rebecca Lissner, a key player in the Office of Vice President Central America Strategy, is here today to share her perspective on investing in Central America's northern countries and women's economic empowerment. Prior to joining the Office of the Vice President, Dr. Lissner was Acting Senior Director for Strategic Planning at the National Security Council, where she served as the lead author of the Biden-Harris administration's national security strategy and directed the Russia-Ukraine Tiger Team contingency planning process. Prior to that, she was a professor at the U.S. Naval War College and also has a long history as an advisor in a variety of areas. She has a PhD in government from Georgetown University and is also the author of 2 recent books. Following Dr. Lissner's remarks, Maricela Argueta, Senior Director, Head of Latin America at the World Economic Forum, and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs for El Salvador, will join Valentina Sader, Associate Director here at the Center, who also leads our gender equity work, for a framing conversation on the importance and the urgency of women's economic empowerment in the region. After that, we'll have a conversation with Jose Raul Gonzalez, CEO of Cementos Progreso, the largest cement and building materials company in Central America, Paula Tavares, Senior Legal and Gender Specialist at the World Bank, and Maria Liliana Moore, Director for Strategic Development and Partnerships at ProMujer. So with that, please join me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Rebecca Lissner.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thanks to everyone who's here today. It's great to be with this wonderful group, many of whom are partners in the Vice President's work and the administration's work in Northern Central America. Congratulations in particular to the Atlantic Council, especially on your launch of the Central America Task Force. You all have really been terrific partners to us in so many areas, and we appreciate the outside thought, scrutiny, and support that you provide to much of our work. So early on in our administration, President Biden asked Vice President Harris to lead the U.S. government's focus on addressing the root causes of migration in Northern and Central America, in particular from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, much as President Biden had himself done when he was vice president in the Obama-Biden administration. And over the ensuing almost 2 years under Vice President Harris's leadership, the Biden-Harris administration has developed and implemented its root causes strategy. And really at the core of this strategy for the vice president, for the president, are sort of three guiding principles. The first is that people do not organically want to leave their homes. When they do, it's because they're fleeing harm or because by staying home, they can't meet their own basic needs or the needs of their families. Second, we recognize that the U.S. government simply cannot do this work alone. Addressing the root causes of migration requires bilateral, trilateral, multilateral relationships and dialogues. It requires partnership with the civil sector, civil society, and the private sector as well, and that's why so many of these partners who are here today are so important. And third, to effectively address the acute factors and the long-term chronic challenges that spur migration, we need to take a comprehensive approach. And that includes promoting good governance, reducing violence, and empowering women. So with all of these principles and insights in mind, we've organized our root causes strategy around 5 pillars: to address economic insecurity and inequality, combat corruption, strengthen democratic governance, and advance the rule of law, promote respect for human rights, labor rights, and a free press, counter and prevent violence, extortion, and other crimes perpetrated by criminals and criminal organizations, and combat sexual, gender-based, and domestic violence. So to advance all of these goals, Vice President Harris launched the Call to Action for Northern Central America in May of 2021, with the aim to galvanize private sector investment for the region. And from the very beginning, this effort was a collaboration with the nonprofit Partnership for Central America, which is a coalition of private companies, nonprofits, civil society organizations who seek to advance economic opportunity in support of this vision of hope for the region. And just last month, Vice President Harris was thrilled to announce that this public-private partnership has generated more than $4.2 billion of investment in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We already see these investments generating results. They're creating jobs, they're connecting people to the internet, they're bringing people into the formal financial economy. For example, in just over 18 months, they have brought more than 1 million people into the formal financial economy, including 65,000 people who now have bank accounts because of this work, and have connected 4 million people to the internet. I think these statistics are not just impressive in the aggregate, but also reflect so many individual people whose quality of life, whose economic opportunities have changed as a result of this work. And the idea is that these integrated investments are creating what Vice President Harris likes to call an ecosystem of opportunity in Northern Central America. They're mutually reinforcing efforts and investments, and they complement and build upon ongoing engagements to strengthen this ecosystem. So our root causes strategy and these investments represent a long-term development effort. We recognize that. This is not work that will happen overnight. This is not a region that will change overnight, but we are heartened that we do already see some positive trends. Data from the Department of Homeland Security shows that the numbers of migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, where our root causes efforts have been focused, have significantly declined over the past 18 months. And we're cognizant these trends could change over time. We'll continue to monitor them. But I think that this gives us an indication of the positive impact that our work has had thus far and the potential should we continue it. We're now on track to meet the goals set out by the Partnership for Central America, which includes the creation of 1 million new jobs by 2032 and the inclusion of 6 million people in the formal financial system by 2027. So to sustain this momentum, we are entering the next phase of our public-private partnership, which we have named Central America Forward. Launched by Vice President Harris last month, Central America Forward includes a new series of U.S. government commitments to complement and support investments from the private sector and programming from civil society. These commitments will support business-enabling reforms, facilitate investment-led growth, and promote economic development in the region, all consistent with the broader goals of the Biden-Harris administration's root causes strategy. Specifically, and I think quite importantly, Central America Forward incorporates a focus on good governance and labor rights and includes U.S. government commitments to complement and support private sector investments. So as part of this, to complement the Vice President's launch of Central America Forward, the Department of State and the Partnership for Central America, as well as its membership, announced a Good Governance, Good Jobs declaration. This joint declaration highlights the important role our partnership with the private sector can play in fostering an environment where the rule of law and decent work can flourish. In particular, the pledge highlights meaningful due diligence, adoption of good practices, including as related to meaningful stakeholder engagement, compliance with domestic and international laws, including with respect to the elimination of corruption, the right of freedom of association and to collective bargaining, the elimination of all forms of forced or compulsory labor, the effective abolition of child labor and of human trafficking, the elimination of unlawful discrimination, including based on gender in respect of employment and occupation, and of course, a safe and healthy working environment. This pledge and our actions underscore that investment and good governance need to go hand in hand. And we in the U.S. government, but also our partners in the private sector, will not turn a blind eye to bad behavior that enables corruption or violates human rights. And we do this because we know that doing so actually furthers the economic goals that we all share in the long term. Moreover, we know that the private sector holds significant influence, and it must, can, and should be a force for good. So those that join us through the Partnership for Central America as part of the Vice President's Central America Forward initiative must be up to the task, and we know that they are. Another important component of Central America Forward is the creation of an investment facilitation team. This is modeled on an investment facilitation team Vice President Harris launched at last year's Summit of the Americas to help the Caribbean region address the climate crisis. This team of experts will support clean energy infrastructure projects from concept to financing in Central America. We know that the lack of reliable energy infrastructure in northern Central America is one of the principal constraints to economic growth in the region. And this approach will help integrate U.S. government resources to facilitate financing for these projects. Now, the Central American Investment Facilitation team is still in its conceptual phase, and we look forward to working with many of you here as we continue to grow and develop it. But what I can tell you is that it will be run out of the State Department's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, and it will bring together U.S. government officials from across the interagency, including USAID, USTDA, USTR, DFC, Commerce, and EXIM. The team will identify a pipeline of projects, develop and fund technical assistance packages to support project preparation, establish a mechanism to vet local partners, showcase projects to potential investors, and facilitate access to financing for these projects. So we think it really offers a comprehensive approach to building a pipeline of the types of infrastructure investments that we know the region so desperately needs, both to create economic opportunity for its people, but also to improve the investment climate for private sector investors. Now, once again, I want to reiterate that for all of this work to succeed, we need broad-based collaboration. This is not something that the U.S. government can do on its own, really by definition. And that includes the private sector, it includes civil society, and of course it includes many of you here today whose work, whose ideas, whose insights are critically important, including, of course, our friends at the Atlantic Council. So recognizing that today is International Women's Day, let me just note that today is a focus on women's rights, bringing attention to issues of women's economic empowerment, gender equality, and gender-based violence. At last year's Summit of the Americas, in her remarks to the CEO Forum, Vice President Harris offered the following illustrative scenario, which we think really captures the theory of the case for much of our Central America work. Picture this, she said. Imagine a woman in Honduras who lives in a small rural town. She's a single mother. She has 2 children. She does not have a formal education and has never had steady work. Instead, she takes on an odd job here or there. She often lays awake at night, worried about whether she can put enough food on the table, wondering if her children can break the cycle of poverty that is all too common where she lives. Then let's imagine a beverage company announces new investments sourcing coffee from her hometown in Western Honduras. Imagine the company then offers her a job cultivating that coffee. Imagine then that an international aid program provides lunch for her children at school, improving their nutrition and health. That a financial company helps her open a bank account in the form of a digital wallet. Imagine that she now has some disposable income, she saves, and she starts moving up the economic ladder. And then a telecom company makes an investment and connects her town to the internet. She gains access to new information and online tools that help her reach into her imagination about what she can achieve. And so she starts to think about entrepreneurship and the idea of building something based on a vision of for herself and for her community. Imagine then that USAID provides her with a grant to establish her own ecotourism business, and that she accesses credit for the first time, hires employees, her business grows, and she thrives. This story, of course, is hypothetical, but it illustrates what we believe is possible when governments and businesses and NGOs and academia and civil society truly integrate our approach and concentrate it and build synergies among our work. The scenario is then our vision for millions of people, especially women, who can benefit from our strategy and our collective work to address the root causes of migration from Central America and to promote greater investment there. So as you can see, we have ambitious goals and a lot of work still to do. We've also begun to make gains, and we believe with your partnership, we can create greater opportunities and achieve even more for the benefit of the people of this region. Moreover, we believe that the work that the Vice President is leading in Northern Central America is really a model, and we consistently hear from our partners, both within and outside of government, that they see considerable value in what we're doing in bringing people together and fostering these ecosystem of opportunities, and there's even interest in scaling this approach and looking for ways to replicate it outside of this region because it has been so successful. So thank you again to Jason and to everyone for joining us here today. Thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Vice President and the administration, and I look forward to working all together in caring for this critical work in Central America.
Rebecca, I want to thank you again for setting the stage and also for laying out those ambitious goals, which, as you know, we share here at the Atlantic Council, and particularly for resharing the story of the Vice President, and so far as how the private and public sectors can work together to improve the life of one person, many lives, and women in particular. So thank you again for joining us today. With that, let me turn over to my colleague Valentina Sader to moderate the next part of our conversation.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Dr. Lisner, for sharing your insights and the priorities and the efforts of the Office of the U.S. Vice President. Without further ado, I would like to now turn the conversation to Minister Marisol Argueta, former Foreign Minister of El Salvador and currently head of the Regional Agenda for Latin America and a member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. She's joining us virtually today from Guatemala. Hello, Minister. How are you?
Hello, Valentina.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Minister Argueta, Jason and Dr. Lisner alluded to the challenges women in Northern Central America face in accessing financial services and formal employment. What exactly are some of these challenges and what strategies can be employed to address those?
Thank you, Valentina. Let me first of all thank the Atlantic Council, Jason and all the team for inviting me to take part in this very important conversation. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to contribute to the Partnership for Central America led by Vice President Harris. And it was very, very encouraging to hear Dr. Lisner's insights on the very important work that is deployed in the northern countries of Central America. I also want to acknowledge, especially today, all the women around the world that celebrate the International Women's Day. With regards to your first question on the challenges that are faced by women in the northern countries of Central America, it is very alarming to know that less than 40% have access to bank accounts, and less than 6% actually have loans, mortgages. This shows the important need to work in improving the access for financial services. Other challenges reflect, for example, in the lower levels of financial and also in digital literacy by the Central American women. It is documented that also many are very adverse to risk and fear failure. Many also lack sufficient assets for collaterals or a proof of income that is required by financial institutions to acquire loans or to enter the formal banking sector. It is, however, very ironic also to see that evidence shows that the highest level of repayment of loans is actually done by women, by those that do have access to loans. That it proves also equality, which is responsibility by many women. It's very important thus to facilitate that access, that education, and to reinforce that assurances that they can do better in terms of their economic empowerment. In regards to your second question on formal employment, in general, informality is a significant deficiency throughout all of Latin America. And the pandemic had a major impact, especially on women. The closing of schools and care facilities during the pandemic had a very, very high impact on those sectors that are mostly intensive in female labor. And many face the loss of jobs. There's still an important gap in jobs to be recovered. And that also includes the informal sector. But in addition to the contraction in employment, women's economic autonomy was affected partly by the increase in the workload at home, which is unpaid and unfortunately, in many cases, not even acknowledged. So it is very difficult for many women that work at home to reconcile domestic activities with formal work, limiting thus their possibility to fully participate in the formal labor force. However, it is also important to recognize that virtual work that can be performed at work has provided certain flexibility and has opened opportunities for women in areas that can be performed virtually. With regards to your question with regards to the strategies, I think there are many actions that can be taken, many to address the many areas where there's still a disadvantage for women in Central America. But let me focus on three aspects. First, I believe it's very important to pay more attention to the care economy as a priority in the studies and in the policies for the advancement of women and for the empowerment, the economic empowerment in particular. Second, I think it's necessary to integrate or to maintain a gender perspective in the analysis and the planning and the design and the implementation of policies that are addressing informality in the region. And third, another area of focus is to consider the trends and the evolution of jobs so that we can strengthen those skills and capacities for employability and for entrepreneurship, especially paying attention to the digital economy. These are, I think, three very important aspects that need to be stressed in those strategies being devised to address and to improve the advancement of women and their economic empowerment.
Minister, we're going to go deeper into those aspects with our experts joining us here in person today too. But one last question to you before we move into our in-person studio. In what ways do you see public-private partnerships could be a catalyst of economic empowerment of women in Northern Central America, and how do we ensure that these are effective and sustainable? Dr. Listener was mentioning just earlier about this whole of society party approach to women's economic empowerment and economic prosperity in general, how do we see collaboration with the public and private sectors in this front?
Very critical question, Valentina. Bringing governments, business, and civil society together is essential in promoting economic empowerment for women and also in tackling structural issues that are inhibiting women from entering the work or impeding the
I believe we lost sound from you.
She muted herself.
Oh,
my
there we go.
Sorry for that.
No worries.
So I was mentioning that it's very key to bring governments, civil society, and business together to identify which barriers are inhibiting women from entering the labor force or from progressing towards higher levels of leadership in the workforce. It is very key also to identify and devise responses that can address discriminatory regulations or even practices in the workforce. And in many cases are noticed, are involuntary, however, are harming the possibilities for women to access work and to access levels of leadership in the workforce. For efforts to be sustainable and effective, I believe it's very important to elaborate comprehensive diagnosis based on an evidence baseline on where we stand with regards to parity and with regards to these obstacles and barriers that I mentioned earlier, and to work together, government, civil society, and businesses in skilling, reskilling, and upskilling women to boost their employment in high growth sectors. I stress the fact of the importance of the digital economy, where there is a cultural disadvantage for women. There is no biological proof that women have any disadvantage with regards to learning in the STEMs areas. And I believe it's very important to begin at an early stage to encourage women into studying in these areas where there will be an abundance of jobs.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Finally, at the World Economic Forum, in partnership with the International Development Bank, we have launched an initiative, a gender parity initiative with 8 accelerators across Latin America. The last accelerator that we launched at Davos last January was precisely on Honduras, with the government of Honduras and with the partnership of Central America. And we are certain that this will contribute in promoting women's economic empowerment in the country.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on International Women's Day. To dive even further on the opportunities that still remain for women and the economies of Northern Central America, I would like to now turn to this stellar group of panelists and experts that we have joining us here in our studios in Washington, D.C. today. I will start with you. Maria Liliana Moore is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Development at ProMujer. She has vast experience in fostering alliances and structuring financial vehicles to promote women's financial inclusion, impact investing, and entrepreneurship in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Maria Liliana, for joining us. Paula Tavares is also the Senior Legal and Gender Specialist at the World Bank, where she focuses on promoting gender-informed policymaking, improving the legal framework for women's rights, and fostering economic opportunities for women, also a fellow Brazilian. So thank you for joining us, Paula. Last but not least, Jose Raul Gonzalez is the Chief Executive Officer at Progresso. Guatemalan-based, Progresso is the largest cement and building materials company in Central America, having operations in 7 countries. Maria Liliana, Paula, Jose Raul, welcome to the Atlantic Council and thank you for joining us today. I invite those watching us in our studios in Washington, D.C., as well as those connecting virtually to also follow this conversation at our hashtag AC Central America, as well as the hashtag Mujeres at the Table. So we have been talking about women's economic empowerment and the important role that women play in the region's economy. But in what way does women empowerment foster long-term prosperity? And I'll start with you, Paula.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Valentina, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this important discussion on this very important day, International Women's Day. So very happy to be here to discuss some of the work that we've been doing and the views on this. At the World Bank, this is something that we've been focusing on for over 10 years, over a decade really, looking at some of these challenges and the issues affecting women's economic empowerment, and really the understanding that investing in women really is smart economics. It's not just the right thing to do, as many have said, but it's also really promoting growth and development and economic prosperity for countries. We know that holding back the full potential of half your population really has economic costs and setbacks for economies, countries, and regions as a whole. For example, the World Bank estimates that due to gender inequalities in lifetime earnings globally, we are losing about $172 trillion in human capital wealth. And there are other statistics that are quite impressive that show really the cost of gender inequality and the importance of investing in women, right? In terms of the World Bank, I mean, there's a focus really on 4 key areas within the strategy, and really all of these connect very closely to women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion. We look at human endowment, so investment in health and education, and as we saw, you know, all of this is a basis to ensuring that women can grow up and contribute fully. Looking at access to assets, and this is assets, property, financial assets. This is assets to digital means and networks. So assets as a whole in land. Access to jobs, more and quality jobs, so looking at decent work, looking at the importance of really ensuring that women can be fully engaged in formal employment and have decent conditions to work. And then also the issue of access to or agency, women's agency and voice, which really connects to women's leadership and role in decision making and how that influences not only policies but the impact of that on societies as a whole. And really understanding that the impact of women's economic empowerment is multifold. So we know that countries that and regions that promote women's economic empowerment and where greater gender equality exists, we have better economic outcomes, better development outcomes, more competitiveness. You have more stable economies and prosperity. So really all of this showing the importance really of promoting women's economic empowerment for sustainable growth and for a resilient future.
Jose Raul, I wanted to turn to you in terms of, we were also speaking about the importance of public-private partnerships in this front. And you, in Progreso, also, you know, a healthy business environment is also indispensable to having women as part of the economy and as part of and active contributors to the economy in this sense. My question to you is about the business environment in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras in particular. How does Progreso view the business environment in these 3 countries in particular, and in what ways can these countries go one step further in attracting new company investments and also including women as part of those developments?
Well, thank you, and congratulations to the ladies on the day.
Thank you.
Inevitably, all of us speak out of our own experiences, and my company has 123 years of experience in the business in the region, and from the beginning, we're a big company now, but in those days, 1899, this was a small family-owned corporation in which women played an important role because the founder, Carlos Novela, had his wife by his side and his 2 daughters by his side. And he was not only a visionary in terms of entrepreneurship, but also in terms of social, because he develop education for the workers and health for the workers and their families way, way, way before this was something that we now take as for granted. So I've seen that woman that Vice President Harris developed in the story that we just heard. Very, very passionate story, but I've seen them, and I'm a witness to the importance of the empowerment of women. And the last experiment, so-called, that we had was when we built a $1.3 billion investment in a new cement plant in Guatemala. And we entered into this region and we understood that we couldn't build this 21st century plant if the conditions of the women and the population were at 17th century level. So our foundation started empowering the women, giving them the capacitation and all the education that they needed, because we understood that the multiplying effect of empowering women, not only with jobs, but also with skills, would create better families. The kids would be better nurtured. The husbands would be also, a little bit concerned that we were employing women and that we were giving the women the economic power to make their own decisions without having to consult everything to their husbands. So 12 years later, fast forward, the community is a healthy community because we have now kids that are better nurtured. We have a school that are employing, that are educating the future women of the area. And that success and social economic study is the proof of life that woman that Vice President was referring to exists, and it can be created out of the cooperation between public and private partnerships. We have challenges in the region, but as entrepreneurs, we are trained only to see the opportunities. And the opportunities and the number that was just given to us about the possibility of economic growth, development, and well-being for everybody, if we invest in our women, it's amazing. And we couldn't agree more on that strategy. And I think that the best part of this forum is that we are going to develop new relationships, and we're going to come out of here with better tools in order to look for that very, very good objective that we have.
And going back to also the point about the business environment in those three countries, how do you see and how do you anticipate or expect that these three countries can really focus on attracting even more investment to that region in particular?
Well, we're working with the different agencies of the United States in order to make the region a more attractive place to invest. We understand that the challenges is, for example, that the GDP of the United States is 7 times the GDP of Guatemala. It's 12 times the GDP of Honduras. So that pull factor that the United States have with all this job creation in the area also is a challenge to contain that migration that is migrating basically for economic reasons. But we're working with the US government and with the private sector of the three countries in order to create the jobs and the opportunities to maintain our best workforce, our best brains in the country in order to contribute locally to the economy. It is a challenge, but there is hope. We've seen, for example, that Mexico has right now, negative migration, meaning that more Mexicans come to Mexico that go to the United States. That implies that we probably should double our GDP per capita in order to achieve that number where the threshold of migrating or staying, people rather stay than migrate. It's about the GDP per capita that Costa Rica has, for example, and Costa Rica hasn't been a net sender of people to the United States. So for that, we need to improve definitely investment, we need to improve the business environment, and we need to create the opportunities for foreign companies, not only US-based, to attract. We have seen, as the numbers have demonstrated, improvement in those areas, but obviously this is a long-term commitment. It has to be at least 20 to 25 years in order to see the change, to double that GDP per capita in the region in order to mitigate the motivations to come here to the United States, even though the United States has been and will continue to be the country that will attract most migration from all over the world.
Maria Liliana, turning to you also, we see that the theme of today's Women's International Day is about the digital space. We also heard the minister also speaking on this issue of the digital economy, and bridging the gender digital divide will be crucial in boosting efforts to reduce gender inequality moving forward. What is the role of the private sector in upskilling women, and how does this contribute to fostering a sustainable business environment, like we were just talking to Jose Raul here? And more specifically, can you tell us a little bit about ProMujer's effort in this space?
Of course. Thank you, everyone, and happy to be here at the Atlantic Council, Jason. I will say a couple of things. So first, we're commemorating International Women's Day. We're not celebrating. We don't need like, oh, thank you, you're a woman. No, it's like commemorating what we have achieved, but what we need yet to achieve. And yesterday I was at a panel at the Commission of the Status of Women, this week and next week at the UN. And yes, technology innovation is one of the crucial themes of this year. So let me tell you a little bit about what we have seen at ProMujer. ProMujer is a social enterprise, and we advance gender equality in the region. How we do that? In a holistic approach. So we do it with financial inclusion, health and well-being, and skilling opportunities. And we don't see that happening without those three components. So specific about skilling and access to internet and connectivity. So what we've seen worldwide in 2019, the CEPAL says, okay, 48% of women have access to internet worldwide versus men, 55%. But if you go deeper to the region, to Latin America, you see that 4 of 10 women do not have access to connectivity and to skilling training in the digital age. And if you go deeper in the region, in Northern Central America, you see that what is going on in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador is totally different. For example, you see in Guatemala a lot of, like more than 85%, and especially youth, using smartphones and working on them. But in Honduras, about 38%. And then you go to El Salvador, and it's around 50%. So you cannot treat each country as a region per se, but you have to deal with the specific issues in each country. Then what we can see about investment, because you're talking about, it's not only about digital inclusion, it's also about investing and financial inclusion for women in the region. So what we have seen in Latin America, and even in Central America is more deeper, is, for example, if you ask companies in the Latin America and says, like, how much are you willing to invest in gender mainstreaming component for digital transformation, it was not more than 50% of companies that wanted to invest. That was not a priority. They wanted to invest, but it was not a priority for around 50 to 60% of those companies. And then if you go and look at the investment atmosphere in the region, only the impact investment, only 10% of those investments go to women's owned companies. So it's really low. So we still have to do a lot. Examples of what we're doing at ProMujer in Northern Central America. So first, financial inclusion. We have been in the region. We started in Nicaragua more than 25 years ago. We have been doing projects of financial inclusion and financial literacy in the region. But specifically in 2021, we joined the Partnership for Central America as one of the first social enterprise focused on women empowerment. And we made commitments for the next 5 to 10 years for Central America. And what we did is we partnered, you say public-private partnership, so we partnered with Microsoft, for example, to do training in digital entrepreneurship. But to do so, we couldn't do it without just training in digital skills for women. The literacy level is really low. So you have to start first with the digital skills, not access, usage, but also appropriation of technology for women. Then we also, for example, partner with Google for financial inclusion. So for example, right now we're giving in Guatemala woman's first loan. They don't have to have a credit history, but we're giving them the first loan that we have. And then another thing that we're doing in entrepreneurship is we launched what we call Emprende Pro Mujer. So it's what we call edutainment platform. So we have a hybrid model. So when you go to rural areas, we know they don't have the connectivity. So we have a hybrid model when they have like mentors that train women in using this digital, like using their mobile to access digital wallet, or how to get trained in your cell phone. And so we need those women because they don't have the whole capacity to do so. But then you have the digital platform that people can just take micro learnings on financial inclusion, leadership, gender-based violence. So we're doing that. And the last thing we do is we have a fund called the ILU Woman Empowerment Fund, and we have invested in companies throughout Latin America, but we have invested in companies in Guatemala and Honduras, and do technical assistance in gender lenses. So for example, we train them how it's important to have women in their board of directors or in senior level positions. We train them how they can include women in value chain, women entrepreneurs and micro-entrepreneurs, so they can source products for the company, and also, for example, how to design products and goods, just focusing on what a woman or a girl needs. So that's what we have been doing in the region.
That's wonderful and great to see all of the efforts that the region as a whole and all three countries are taking, as well as Pro Mujer taking. I wanted to also jump into something that you mentioned with regards to and something that was mentioned beforehand too in terms of informality. I think that this is something that it was exacerbated also by the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic, and something that we've seen it was disproportionately impacted and affected women all over the world in these past 3 years. Paula, data shows that up to 62% of women in Central America are in the informal sector, but how can leaders across the region, and maybe we can even think beyond just Central America in particular, but use this moment to help empower women? What policies must we double down on, and what do we need to prioritize from now on?
Thank you. So I think it's important still to remember the impacts that COVID had as we move on to the new normal and, of course, recovery efforts, but still understanding the disproportionate impact that COVID had on women, especially women's economic empowerment and women's participation in the labor force and sustainability and financial sustainability. And you know what we've seen that COVID really did is it just exacerbated existing issues and existing inequalities. And to some extent, it was I think an eye-opener for the world, for many countries, for many regions. Not that these issues weren't acknowledged before or present, but just the visibility that it gained, I think, led to a lot of work that is being pushed forward and a lot of new initiatives. So that's perhaps the good news. We're still seeing the impacts, though. We know that women were the ones who lost the majority of jobs. They pulled out of the workforce, a lot associated with issues connected to the jobs they're in, the types of vulnerable employment that they're in, informal work, moving into informal work, and associated a lot with family responsibilities, so the unpaid care work issue that was already mentioned here. And so really a lot of the policies that we've seen, that we've been tracking, and this is, the World Bank tracks a lot of these laws, especially in terms of the enabling environment for women's economic empowerment. This is published in an annual report called The Women, Business, and the Law. The last edition was just launched and really shows the landscape globally of laws and the enabling environment for women in this sense. But I would point out a few aspects that are critical and that we saw the impacts of, especially during COVID. So when you think of access to assets and access to property, strong property rights for women, this includes access to land, ensuring that women can have access to titling of land and property of land in many countries. This often includes access to IDs, right? We don't think of that, but in many countries, and I know this is an issue, of course, in the region. ensuring that that's an enabler. This is, of course, a leverage for women in terms of financial insecurity, but also in accessing and having collateral for accessing loans to start businesses, to become productively active and grow their businesses. So this is really an important component. When we talk about assets, we also think, of course, of financial assets. More broadly, we talk about access to digital technology. So all of these are assets that can be used, and we saw that women are less empowered and have less access. So policies focusing on these areas and ensuring that women are included are critical, right? Then we think about employment and participation in the labor force, and then what are some of the protections that are needed. So strong labor legislation and the implementation of this. So strong protections for women. This often includes social protection. It includes ensuring that there's protection from discrimination in terms of employment, in terms of growing within their careers. This is often connected as well to the fact that women are less often capable of working in the formal sector because of family responsibilities. So what are workplace policies that governments can put in place and that companies can put in place that can ensure that women can manage and can deal with both responsibilities and even ensure that we redistribute more of these responsibilities. That's part of the effort that we've been focusing on. So what are the leave policies? What are the policies that can be put in place to ensure that the responsibility is shared and that women are not affected with what we call time poverty because of unpaid care work? And then in entrepreneurship, more broadly, looking at financial inclusion for women, right? So access to financial services. We work with policies that protect women from discrimination, but you also work specifically with programs and initiatives that can ensure that there are there's training for women, that there are opportunities for women really to access financial services in different capacities. So I think these are some of the areas that we've been looking at that have been critical.
I think that, Paula, you listed some specific mechanisms also to ensure women's economic participation. And for us to wrap up, I wanted to also turn to you, Jose Raul, and you, Maria Liliana, in terms of creating the conditions for women to fully participate in all sectors of the economy. How can countries and private sector companies alike include investing in women as part of their sustainable and inclusive economic development goals and plans? I'll start with you, Jose Raul, as our last chance here.
Well, I would say that because it is the most profitable investment that you can do either economically or socially. We have seen that women are a better credit risk. Women multiplying effect in their houses is incredibly well for the nutrition of the boys and the well-being of the whole family. So going back to your informality question, we have to set up examples and good policies, for example, in employing not only women, but also giving them the opportunity to participate as a supplier of the company. We have a cooperative of cafe, mainly of women. We have a cooperative of flowers, which are nearby our plants that they manufacture, so we can give them preference in developing that small business that we all started informal. But then, given the enough size and enough knowledge and capacitation, they can go and get into the formal economy where they can get the loans and they can get all the other requirements in order to grow their business. So we can have that kind of inclusive policies as far as providers for the company is concerned. And we're very proud, and we have very, very good people that you can finance in our region, and this is the great thing about being together today, because we can start, making an exponential growth to these good policies that the private sector, both in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, can have and can lead and should lead by the example.
I love that these partnerships are happening live here as we speak. Yes. Maria Liliana, please, over to you.
I will say to create those conditions, you have to do two things. So first, work with the private sector and with the financial institutions. So what we're doing in ProMujer is we have the Gender Knowledge Lab, and we provide consultancies. We have done it with banks, for example, the Interbank in Brazil, Mercado Pago and Mercado Libre in Argentina, DaviPlata in Colombia, and we're using a gender scorecard to see how they're really looking at gender perspective and on their investments. And that's crucial because the first barrier is like, okay, you don't have collateral, or you don't own something specific, or you don't have the skills, or you don't have the capacity. So working with the financial institutions is crucial, and the private sector, for example, to start like sourcing from these entrepreneurs. And then the other side is working with the women. So you give them the first loan, and the conditions of the loan are really flexible. But then you also providing with health services for them and their families. So for example, we don't see at ProMujer possible that you can succeed in a business or in the entrepreneur if you don't take care of your mental and your physical health and in the one of your family. So that's what we call it holistics, and then the skilling opportunity and care economy. Marisol said, you just said, it's important. We're doing in Northern Central America trainings in decent work and care economy. So about like how you redistribute work, how you balance it, how you repair, because how many women don't do unpaid work, and they don't even understand that that should be paid. So those are the things that the two sides that we have to work to create the enabling conditions for women in the region.
There is so much more than we can continue to talk about here, not only about women's economic empowerment, but also about Central American economy and investment in general. But our time is up, unfortunately. I wanted to thank you, Paula. Thank you, Jose Raul. Thank you, Maria Liliana, for joining us today. Thank you to our viewers for joining us virtually, and to our in-person audience for also being here with us today. I invite you to follow our conversation and the rest of our work on Central America through the hashtag AC Central America, as well as our month-long campaign on Mujeres at the Table with the hashtag as well on Twitter. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.